This is our last session for this afternoon. We'll be together for about 45 minutes. It's going to be back to Magdalena and Elaine to help facilitate a little bit more information and more on the Tree of Life activity. So a little bit more time to kind of decompress, kind of focus back inward, and then we'll talk about a self-care strategy as well. So I really want to appreciate those folks that are in a time zone that's further east. I know it's getting late for you. Thank you for your endurance. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Magdalena and Elaine. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you so much. And what I'd like to invite people to do as we get started, we've been sitting for a very long time, and I want to invite people to just stretch. I mean, if you want to stand up, but you could also just sit in your chair and move your legs and stretch out to the sky and notice the stretch. And I see some of you moving your head. Move your body in any way that you'd like. Oh, I just yawned. I know that's a release sensation of the autonomic nervous system. So I can feel myself actually bubbling up with a bit more energy in my body. And also, I'm going to invite you, I went like this, I did that spontaneously, kind of how you'll see it, a horse or a dog sometimes shake it out. So I'm going to invite you, if you could actually do that on purpose and just shake your body a little bit. And sometimes when we do that, it helps us to be in that zone of well-being, that resilient zone. All right. So this part of the day, I know it's the end of the day, and some of you are very tired, but we want to talk about, really, this is about what else is true. And I just loved what Dennis Longknife put into the chat when he was talking about the tribal first food nursery, a way to restore natural indigenous plants. And so with all the suffering that we've heard about today of our dear Mother Earth, that you are so eloquently the caretakers and the stewards for, and to hear that that is what else is true. And this is what this is about for us, because not only are we going to talk about individual self-care, but this is also about, again, family and communal self-care. And I was thinking about this as Angie was doing this last section about the vulnerability assessment. And in order to do the best assessment, if we're in our zone of well-being, we're better able to have our prefrontal cortex in all its wonder of executive functioning, being able to look at what is true about the needs of our community. And also the most important, not the most important, but one of the important capacities is, I love the word adaptive capacity, because that adaptive capacity of communities also exists within human beings. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Magdalena, and she's going to start by talking a little bit about the interventions, the skills that we want to share with you today, and some of the background. And if you could bring up our first slide, or the next slide. Yes.
Perfect. So when I was reflecting on today, I kept thinking over and over again about all of the stories that you were sharing. You were really amplifying the voices of your community, your people, bringing them forward with you. And I was reminded of the teachings of Chief Seattle. And forgive me, because I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but it's something that has stuck with me since I was very young. And it's essentially, we do not inherit the earth from our parents or our grandparents. Rather, we borrow it from our children or our grandchildren. And in so many of the sessions, I just heard folks bringing that perspective in, bringing that wisdom in, speaking about those memories, those teachings. And why I think that is so powerful is that is essentially the work that we are doing. We are trying to provide a path forward for folks that may have not had this lived experience, this worldview, this spiritual view. We are giving a shift in mindset, right, to a Western society. Instead of only being concerned with oneself or capitalism or the things that are often rewarded, we're really talking about something very different. And that really is this forward-thinking place. And I wanted to go back to it. In behavioral health, we are always looking for the assets. We are always looking for the strengths, the resources, the ability to hold hope and healing. And when I think about how we honor all of those who have survived to get us to this point, when I think about their legacy, how we honor them truly is by being who we are, the stewards, the wisdom keepers, the warriors, for those yet to come. And when I think about that, it really is talking about creating a sustainable future for our next generation and what those adaptation strategies really need to be. So if I could thread this together, per se, one of the things we often talk about is the laws of nature. So there's a rhythm, right? There's a rhythm to the world around us. We've been talking about this all day. There's also a natural rhythm in nature within the human nervous system. And if we look at the medicine wheel or the sacred hoop, much like we have seasons of life, we have seasons of life within us from birth to youth. Many of us are talking about the sudden transition to adult elder status, and then ultimately to our spirit world. And when we walk through that path, there is this movement. And what Elaine's going to help walk us through is the fact that we do not have to be trapped in these storms within our body, whether these sensations are of discomfort and pain or well-being. We can draw our attention to these sensations of well-being and truly transform our experience. So our hope is that as we end today and move towards the afternoon and the evening, that we're able to journey you all into those spaces, to tap into some of those natural resources within all of yourselves or within your own communities, so that you can carry those into the evening. And with that, I will share that screen back to Elaine.
Thank you, Sunshine. And if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to do a brief explanation about some of the neuroscience tenets that we have learned is really important to cultivate our well-being. When I went to the mental health breakout groups today, I heard a lot about the suffering. I heard a lot about our teenagers that are suffering as a result of COVID and having to be in confined spaces, and that some of the behaviors, they're acting out behaviors. I heard, about the domestic violence that may be existing in some communities. And we know that there is trauma, and people mention trauma. And so sometimes we can sense a sense of hopelessness to say, well, maybe we'll never get out of it. We're just stuck here. But that's why I think the hope of the nervous system is the concept of neuroplasticity. And that's the lifelong capacity of the brain to change and rewire itself in response to the stimulation of learning and experience. And so when we think about, and I was thinking about the vulnerability assessment and the adaptive capacity, but if we think about ways and experiences that can cultivate well-being, then we are designed to have that change within our nervous system to bring greater healing to ourselves that then can reflect out to our families and communities. There is a concept called neurogenesis, which is the ability to create new neurons. Neurons are brain cells and connections between those neurons throughout a lifetime. And if you go to the next slide, I often use the metaphor of a garden, in that, gardens are so important for our sustenance. But what if we only poured water on the weeds of the garden, that sometimes the nourishing vegetables and fruits would not flourish? We know that there's medicinal qualities in weeds as well, not to say we want them to go away, but so we know that what we pay attention to grows, and that grows within our mind and what we think and what we feel and what we sense. So brain cells that fire together, wire together, and the more that they fire together, like the more that you pour the nourishing water on the plants in your garden, they will hopefully flourish. But if we don't cultivate that well-being, for example, if our focus is really on all the things that are going wrong, then that becomes the pathways that are nurtured, not only within our thinking and our feeling, but also within our sensations that can lead to great distress. So if we go to the next slide, this is about another way that we're formed, and that's the tuning and pruning concept. So what's tuning? The positive experiences that can change the actual structure of the brain by increasing the number of connections between neurons. It's my metaphor of the garden that I just used. And if you can see this image, you'll see that there's a well-worn pathway, and we can say, oh, that's a well-worn pathway that we've traveled over and over again. But notice that part of the the pathway is disappearing. And that's called pruning. Those are neural connections that aren't used, they weaken and often disappear. It's the use it or lose it principle. And so, of course, that also has to do with our well-being. If we don't cultivate that, and many of us have had that experience, that maybe we wake up in that low zone state that we talked about earlier, and it's hard for us to get out of it. So this is another very important reason neuroscientifically why it's important to really invest in our well-being. And as much as we, of course, like we did today, we've leaned into what the suffering is, we can also lean into what those adaptive capacities are, not only within our community, but within ourselves. So if we go to the next slide, this is a key concept of the model that Magdalena and I both believe in. And some of you do this anyway. It's a concept that we call resourcing, developing your resources. So I'm asking you three very simple questions. The last one lost its question mark, but what or who uplifts you? What or who brings you peace and calm? What or who helps you through challenging times? And Geraldine Kelly, I'm going to try to paraphrase what you said when you were in the breakout group. You said that what elders need, and please correct me if I don't say it exactly correct, is to be calm, to go forward in a more calm and collected manner. And so one of the ways that we can do that and nurture that is remember the times that we have been calm in the past. And when we call that up, we can bring it into the present moment and sense it within our body. The third question is what or who helps us through challenging times? And so you don't have to answer every single question, but if you go to the next slide, we're talking about human resources that we already have experienced that exist within us. I heard so much about traditions and cultural practices. And of course, those can be some of those nourishing qualities. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to ask Magdalena if she wants to say anything. Magdalena right now has 101 fever, so that's why I'm kind of taking the lead in this. She's so lovely to be here, and I have so much appreciation to you, Magdalena Sunshine, for being here. Is there anything you want to add to what I've just said? Or not? I think she's okay. All right. So this is an exercise that I'm going to invite you to think about, and I'm going to have you take about 5 minutes to think about it. So if you can name one of your resources, the answers to the one or more of the questions that I just asked you, and describe that resource to yourself. And as you think about that resource and the details of that resource, I'm going to invite you to notice what happens. What happens to your breathing? What happens to your muscles? Do they tense? Do they relax? So I'll give you an example. Angie, can you help me with something? Can I ask you a question? Can you maybe share with me one of your resources, like one of the answers to that question? What uplifts you? What brings you peace or calm? What or who? Is there anything or anyone that helps you get through challenging times?
Yeah, I mean, the first two little bugs that went to my mind were my two kids, Maple and Lincoln.
Can you tell me a little bit about your children?
They're Maple is a little 2-year-old, Lincoln's a 5-year-old, and they exhaust me, but they're the single humongous most the biggest resource of joy in my life. So if I want to recharge and play and be human and love and just be a one big ball of present love, that's where I go.
And so as you're thinking about them now, and maybe even I'm going to invite you to call up what you like to do with them, can you just take a moment of pause and notice what happens inside as you think about these two little beings that you've brought into the world?
It's like I almost wanted to cry at first.
And tears come. Do those feel like sweet tears or they feel like sad tears?
It's just like, when you love something so stinking much,
yes.
If you and that your whole heart is just feels like it's wrapped up in them and you want to protect them from everything.
So I'm just going to invite you even to notice the warmth of the sweet tears. I'm going to call them sweet tears, those gratitude tears. And also notice any of the other sensations inside.
I felt the impulse to just get up and go hug them because they're right out there.
They're right out there. Well,
Yeah, I have like, I need my oxytocin fix. I need to feel some skin.
well, even notice what it's like to even think about going and hugging them, even though you can't do it at this moment. I know you're going to do it after this is over, but just notice what that's like to even think about that in the present moment.
I felt it here.
All right. And is that a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensation right here?
It was like a tingle. It was good.
Tingle. All right, a tingle. We like tingles. Tingles are oftentimes a little release of the nervous system as well. So I'm just going to invite you to notice that. So thank you, Angie. You didn't know I was going to do this, but thank you so much for helping me demonstrate resourcing. So
Thank you.
I'm going to invite you to all to do, I'm going to stay quiet for 5 minutes. And what do you think about one of your resources? Describe it to yourself. And then notice what happens inside. And for those who'd like to, I invite you to put your resources in the chat.
I'm going to do you one better, Elaine. Here's my resource right here.
Oh, Shasta, what a love. And so what is that precious being's name?
Charles.
Charles. And Shasta, what do you notice just happening as you're rubbing your face against Charles?
I'm smiling because I love her so much.
So can you notice that smile? And also I'm just wondering, where does that love land in your body? Can you notice where that lands in your body?
Strangely enough, in my stomach.
Yes, no, that's not strange at all. So notice that stomach of yours and notice where that love lands.
I guess I just want to eat her up.
Well, just notice what it's like to be with her right now. Yeah. Even
She's
the
so soft.
and she's so soft, and even noticing the softness. Yeah. So thank you so much, Shasta, for sharing. And one of the things that happens to me is I'm asked both you and Angie about your resources, is I start sensing the same thing in my own body, because we are designed so wonderfully. There's a concept called mirror neurons that we have when we're actually designed to pick up not only the suffering of others, but also the well-being of others. So I certainly can sense that as you've been just telling me about this wonderful kitty of yours. So I'm going to really invite people to read what's in the chat. Serena has a dog that is cute. Is that dog's name Leanne? Yeah.
No, Leanne, our participant, was holding up her puppy.
Oh, her dog too. Okay. The furry ones that can be very, very much resources for us. I have 2 furry ones myself here. So I'm seeing the beach, especially when I can take my dog and go on a nice long walk. My husband and 2 boys sitting on a front of my house, listening to the ocean, being in nature and hearing all the natural noises, all my fur babies. My mama, such a joy and admiration, warm feelings when I see her. Resource, meditation, and prayer. My faith, my family, what I feel is a physical lighter. Yeah, so Joanna, notice that lightness, and I can take a deep breath and my inner vision is clear. So again, I'm going to invite you to notice what it's like for that inner vision to be clearer. So there's so many wonderful resources being added into the chat. I miss Oakland weather so much. Well, even remembering that weather that you appreciate so much and call it to mind. I was born in San Francisco and I love the weather in San Francisco. You just reminded me of one of my resources. So one of the things that happens when you start cultivating resources, and I've done this in community groups, it's almost like you have this giant net that you can kind of bring in and call into yourself, those parts of those resources that others have that then become reminders of your own. So this is a very, very simple exercise that you can do anywhere at any time. And oftentimes people don't even know that you're doing it. But one of the things that's important is that you don't have to be in Oakland, or I don't have to be in San Francisco. And I bet you, Shasta, just thinking about your cat, Charlie, when you're away, can call up some of those same sensations. If you haven't tried it, you might try it, but it's amazing how that can happen. So that's resourcing. And there I see you, Sunshine. Are you able to, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you for inviting me. The one thing that I was thinking as Shasta was holding Charlie is that they purr, cats purr in this healing frequency. And one of the things for resourcing that I also think for me really resonates is the noise and the smell of resources. So as Angie was talking about her little ones, like there's a sense of what they smell like, right? What folks smell like. Bringing that in can really amplify that resource, knowing what that sounds like, that feels like. It's just something that I have found really works for individuals to have a full experience.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that in. And oh, and I have to just also comment on Dennis. Dennis, I also grew up near Santa Cruz. And as a child, that's one of my fondest memories. And I'm thinking about the roller coaster at the boardwalk, also one of the things I really love. And that was one of the most, that was one of my exciting, actually, I can say, not that I was calm, but it was also something that nurtured my well-being. So thank you for reminding me of that. Oh, Serena, I've never had deep fried Oreos, but that sounds quite wonderful. Oh, William, you know the boardwalk too. Yeah, it's, if those of you who've not been to Santa Cruz, there's a Big Dipper old wooden roller coaster. All right, well, so let's go to the next slide. So that's resourcing. And so I've talked about this already, what pay attention to grows, but this is an important concept of what we've learned about cultivating the well-being through our sensory system and calling up resources. There's other skills, but we're just focusing on these two today, is that when you can tell the difference between sensations of well-being and sensations of distress, you then have a choice of what to pay attention to. So no matter what has happened to us in our lived experience, and I could say, share that I had a lot of suffering in my family when I was a child. And if I go there, I can sense like a tightness in my body, but I don't have to live there anymore, because now I know that I can shift my attention to the sensations of well-being, and that actually expands my capacity to not only think clearer, as someone has already commented in the chat, but it also relaxes my muscle where I can show up as my best self. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what this is based upon, because it's very important for us to know about cultivating our well-being. So a sensation is a physical experience in the body, and sensations originate in billions of receptors that are distributed all over our body. And every life experience that we have, every thought and feeling have corresponding sensations. And often when we start out with helping people understand through the community resiliency model, we start out with helping them understand sensations like we just did through a resource. But one of the things we've known, if you look at this was a study that was done in Finland, where I had composite drawings of human beings, and they asked people to color in the yellow color, the brighter colors, where they felt activation in their body, and the darker colors where they didn't feel so much activation or didn't feel any at all. So if you look at anger, and we certainly, when we talk about climate change, for example, we know that when the Fahrenheit goes higher, or Celsius for some of you, that there are more acts of rage and anger that can happen. There's often an increase in domestic violence and child abuse. Notice what happens to the body, even the hands, and think about how people strike out. So this is, and I point this out with anger, because when we can learn how to shift our awareness to the sensations of well-being that are, for example, connected to our happiness, it then can help the nervous system come back into balance. So this is based on neuroscience. And if you come to the next slide, this is called interoceptive awareness. So this is something that neuroscientists, and I know that some of you are from San Diego, it's Dr. Martin Paulus from UC San Diego is one of the leading researchers about interoceptive awareness. And that's the ability to observe body sensations in response to how we think, feel, and move. It's like if you itch, you scratch. So if we have a sensation, there's a behavior. But for some of us, if we're upset, we might strike out, or we might go internal and be depressed and get stuck in that lower high zone states. So the insula reads the physical states in the body, and it communicates to our cortex to take action to keep the body in a state of internal balance. So if you're in a place where it's really hot and you go out with a sweater, your behavior would be to take off the sweater so that you'd be cooler. So what they have found that people that can cultivate this body awareness can reduce impulsivity and promote emotion regulation and clearer thinking, which is why things like this can be so important for the youth that I know that you care so much about. And some of the ways that we design experiences for youth, like through Boys and Girls Clubs, for example, that those kinds of experiences can help children. And when you have different, I know that there was one group that had a adolescent mental health day. Those kind of experiences, bringing teens together and helping them to have collaborative experiences that cultivate their gratitude and happiness and togetherness, has great potential in helping them moving out of depressed states, the low zone states or high zone states, into zones of well-being. So if you go to the next slide, this tells you a little bit about the organizing principles of our nervous system. And one of the things I heard when we were talking about mental health is that a couple of people mentioned fear, that they feel fear. For example, if there is food insecurity, you may have the fear of, oh my goodness, there's the electricity went out, my generator's not working, or I don't have a generator. And so then you're wondering, how am I going to take care of my children? How am I going to feed my children? And so we have ways that our body is designed that when we have an appraisal system that comes out of the limbic area. There's, and some of you have probably heard of the amygdala. I call her Amy G for short. She remembers every bad thing that happens to us. And that she then says, okay, survival instinctual network, you need to go into action. And that survival network, sometimes we do things without thinking. And many of us, when we have fear, these survival networks are working all the time. So sometimes we don't show up as our best self because our worry can consume us. So it's so important for you to know why we started out with resourcing and interoceptive awareness and sensing the body is these very, very simple strategies can help us. Yeah, Lori, I agree with you. Amy G dang her, but she also warns us when there's danger, right? But you know what else she does? She also reminds us when we've had strongly emotional experiences like falling in love, that we sometimes can go that and feel like today is my 48th wedding anniversary. I can remember falling in love with my husband as if it happened yesterday. I could feel a little warmth in my body as I'm saying it. So those kinds of things exist there too. And I'm saying that purposefully, because as much as we're designed to remember the negative things and have trauma, we're also designed for well-being and resilience. So, but when our survival network is activated, our thinking brain, our cortex, right, our thinking network goes offline. We're not as clear. And that's why when we cultivate well-being, which is, I loved that one person said, I can sense that clearer. And people often tell me, oh, it's like there was a film over my eyes that is gone when I did that simple exercise. All right, next slide. So when we talk about some of the suffering that I heard today, I want to really highlight that, you know, sometimes our suffering, we as human beings have this thinking brain that also assigns meaning to suffering. And so sometimes we say, I'm mentally weak. There's something wrong with me. But I want you all to know that it is in our biology to experience the things about our suffering. And there is what we call the stress spectrum. There's positive stress that many of you are called to action about climate change. You can feel your passion. It gives you that. I imagine for some of you, when you think about some strategies to help your community, that positive stress, heartbeat beats a little fast and you are completing an action. It's a very good thing. And then you can feel your balance return quickly. But some of us have tolerable stress where you might need to talk. I might need to call my friend Sunshine and say, Sunshine, I'm having a bad day. Can you help me with this? Because this is causing me stress. It's not going away. And my balance returns. Some of us also, and this is the thing that I think has been so poignant about today for me, is really hearing about the suffering about the land and how the land is so connected to well-being and to cultural and historical well-being, and seeing it suffer is very difficult. And this is really about toxic stress of our land, but there's also toxic stress within our human being, within human beings, within the nervous system. And what is toxic stress? It's the ongoing and relentless body responses to intense stressors. It's a concept that's called allostasis, means this process is helping maintain balance. It produces adrenaline and cortisol so that we can stay in balance. But if it goes on too long, if like we have the foot on the accelerator of our nervous system and we don't know that there's a brake, that's what can lead to the different kinds of health conditions that some of you mentioned today. Increase in diabetes, increase in heart disease, increase in other aspects that have to do with the mind and body not being in alignment. And so if we know this is true, what are some very simple ways, like resourcing with sensory awareness, that can bring that nervous system back into balance, because we're learning how to put that brake onto the nervous system. So if we go to the next slide, there's also Dr. Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin. He has identified that we have as human beings, and this is all over the world. He's done a lot of research on His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Tibetan Buddhist monks when they meditate. We have a resilience circuit that resilience is the rapidity with which you recover from adversity. The positive outlook circuit, one has a healthy and robust positive outlook circuitry when we are able to see and recognize the positive in others, as well as the ability to savor positive experiences. And I say savor because that's sensing in your nervous system. Shasta's beloved Charlie cat, when she did what she did with him, and Angie's beloved children. The attention circuit, emotional well-being is linked to the ability to pay attention. So when I asked you to notice what happens in your body, that is paying attention to your sensory system, and that's contributing to your well-being. And this last one, I just love, the generosity circuit. It's engaging in generosity reliably activates brain circuits that support well-being. And in this research, this tells you why I cry at Hallmark commercials, because if I see someone being generous to someone else, I start to tear up. I imagine some of you do the same thing. And when someone is generous to us, we also may tear up, but also our brain is reacting. But also when we're generous to someone else, the kind of the trifecta of generosity. So when I think about this, what are ways that when we think about adaptive capacity, that we integrate and thread into our systems of support, leaning into cultural practices and maybe new ideas and innovations on how do we cultivate this generosity circuit, or all these circuits. So the next slide, I had to add this, and I'm so glad I did, especially about hearing about your teens. So this is research that's being done by neuroscientists that are far smarter than I could ever be, but 9 to 11-year-old children who practice acts of kindness became happier. 14 and 15-year-olds who practiced gratitude not only got happier, but reported healthier eating habits and intentions to become a better person over the course of a semester. An experiment showed that doing acts of kindness for others leads to changes in immune cell gene expression associated with disease resistance. So when we think about the trauma that our Indigenous communities have experienced all over the world, if we start with even more mindful attention in cultivating these practices, and also really, I heard many of you say some of the sadness is some of the climate change has taken away some of the inherent practices that you would do that is part of the well-being, and also of course COVID that has affected many of us. But to really think with intentionality how we can do this for our children. And as Sunshine so beautifully said in the beginning, how important it is how we cultivate the land for the next 7 generations. So if we go to the next slide, I want to let you know that all of what I've spoken about regarding this model, we have in this iChill app that's in English and in Spanish. So if you want to learn more about cultivating well-being, as we don't have a lot of time today, of course, that you can do this on your own and see how this may be helpful for you. And Sunshine, I want to ask you again, if knowing that you're not feeling so well, if there's anything you want to add to what we've been talking about.
Yeah, no, thank you for being so gracious and leading. I would just say tonight, for so many of us, this is so close and it does feel kind of heavy. So ensuring that if you start to feel like you need a little more, this app is fantastic for kind of guiding you through the practice. I highlight the fact that often many of us in communities of color, we don't do well with self-care. It's like a counter philosophy. We're so used to putting others before self. Often we're so used to being in the place of service. But I really want to be intentional and invitational with the fact that a lot is being covered and it is heavy and it is so close. So really tending to self so that that place of centeredness can come back for tomorrow. And I just, again, this app is such a great way to guide you through so that you can start that practice.
Thank you, Sunshine. And then I think we have the self-care plan next, I hope, but as we're getting the next slide on, oh, Ileana, I just love what you just said. We had summer camp last week and watching the older kids help and teach the young ones and watching the young ones try and return the favor brought me so much joy. That's exactly it. Such a simple thing. And I'm just going to invite you to notice what it's like for me to even read it out loud for you to remember that and notice what happens in your body. Thank you so much for sharing that.
So Elaine, just a quick interjection here on the Tree of Life. We're going to ask people to do this on their own time tonight if they would like to, and that's just filling out it's an extension of the activity we did earlier today. We'll probably send an email out if you feel called to do this and fill out the next 2 in your workbook on pages 23 and 24. You can do that this evening. And then we will move into the self-care plan.
Can I just say one thing too about the Tree of Life exercises? So those 2 suggestions really are about resourcing, and it's really about your community resourcing. So I really encourage you, if you can, have the time to do that. But the self-care plan, and this is really for you to start to think about, and we may not have time to do it all today. You can do this on your own as well and think about it over the next 24 hours. But what are you already doing to widen your zone of well-being that Sunshine mentioned earlier? How could you weave skills into your daily routine? What skills would be the most helpful? What specifically do you need to do differently to embark on a better self-care plan if you think yours needs improvement? And maybe it is exactly the way you want it to be, but this is a time for reflection about what might that be that I could do for myself that would not only help myself, but that the ramifications of that can, be brought forth to my family and community. And finally, to write a statement of encouragement to yourself, strengthening your resolve to improve your self-care plan. And if you go to the next slide that we have, is that when you're done creating your self-care plan, is read your statement of encouragement to yourself. And as you read the statement of encouragement to yourself, pay attention to the sensations inside your body and draw your attention to the neutral or pleasant sensations. And you may notice there's new beliefs, feelings, or meanings may come up. And as that happens, really notice what happens in your body. All right. There we go. So Angie, I know everybody's pretty tired. I really just suggest that they do these on their own, and then we can reflect upon them tomorrow if people would like.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds great. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and I think close it down for today and let people do their own thing. We would have loved to be in person with you all today, but I'm proud of us. We did it. And thank you, Elaine and Magdalena, for lifting us up a bit at the end of the day, which is exactly what we needed. Please get some rest tonight, everybody. If you are called to do those activities, we would encourage you to do it. We would be there to network and have a beer with you, but go and have one on your own. We'll see you back tomorrow. It's going to be a much different day, more panel-ish. And so we are excited to see you then. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.